Welcome Bronco Nation and welcome Mountain West fans to a very special video. We are going to be looking at the new Mountain West commissioner, what she brings to the table so far, because there's a lot of fans out there. I mean, I know for myself personally before I even started looking at this video that I hadn't really heard of her very much. So we're going to talk a little bit about what her background is, what problems she faces here with the Mountain West, and what are the top 3 priorities. So a little bit of a 3 keys to the game kind of feel to this. Top 3 priorities for her term here in the Mountain West, with the top 3 things she needs to address right away here as she starts her term in January, starting her term in January as the new Mountain West Commissioner. Well, let's look at this here. Gloria Nevarez, the new Mountain West Commissioner, taking over from Craig Thompson, longtime Mountain West Commissioner, who has basically driven this conference into the dirt. He took a conference that was on its path to potentially becoming one part of the P6, and so it reduced in the eyes of the nation to the second-rated G5 conference. Now, I've talked a lot in my previous videos about how maybe not this season, because the Mountain West is on a little bit of a dip down this season, though they've recovered nicely in the second half of the season. But in most years, the Mountain West actually, when you compare head-to-head matchups, when you compare total Power 5 wins, when you compare out-of-conference games, the Mountain West actually leads the American Athletic Conference and is the better Group of 5 conference overall. Despite the fact that the Mountain West has better teams and has more historically strong conference, I mean, they've existed for longer than the American Athletic Conference, of course, who was a new arrival after the collapse of the Big East. Yet the American Athletic Conference has consistently, year after year, taken over in the eyes of the nation, like I said, and especially when comparing for those rankings, when talking about going for the New Year's 6 slot, has taken over as the top Group of 5 conference, despite the fact that the Mountain West statistically should be in front of them. And that is entirely on Craig Thompson, the way that he has handled the Mountain West. He took, like I said, a conference that was on the rise. They had BYU, TCU, Utah, lost all 3 of those members, gone, one to Independence and then to the Big 12, and 2 others straight to Big 12 and Pac-12. And now it looks like he's also lost San Diego State. Now, those, of course, unsubstantiated rumors so far, no official announcements, but there has been some rumblings that San Diego State might be on their way out as well. So Gloria Nevarez takes over a conference right now that is really in the dumps. I mean, this is a conference that is in crisis, and there are some big things she's going to need to do to reestablish them. But let's talk a little bit about her real quick, because again, like I said, most fans probably aren't aware of her history. She has done work with San Jose State, Cal, and Oklahoma, so a very broad look there. I mean, you got a Mountain West team, a Pac-12 team, and a Big 12 team, so experience across the country in both the G5 and the Power 5. She was the Senior Associate Commissioner for the Pac-12 Conference, and then most recently she just completed, well, now that she's coming to the Mountain West, completed 4 years as Commissioner of the West Coast Conference, where she really has revitalized that conference, brought in a lot more exposure for them. We're talking about exposure for the Mountain West, brought in a lot more exposure for them and really helped establish their brand there as an FCS conference, but still great work there in the West Coast Conference. So she takes over a conference that's in trouble. Like I said, the East Coast is taking over. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, you know, the threats to Boise State, to the Mountain West, are going to be moving on. You know, you've got Cincinnati and UCF, and they're all going up to join the Big 12. They're not going to, so those aren't going to be threats to you anymore that Boise State has to worry about. That it doesn't mean the American Athletic Conference is no longer going to be a threat. It's because, like I said, the entire time that the American Athletic Conference was going and stealing those New Year's 6 bowl slots, those pole positions, the Mountain West had better teams the entire time. And a lot of times, teams with the same stand record overall and not getting into the rankings, because there's a massive East Coast bias effect that helps the East Coast teams. They play earlier in the day. They are from areas of the coast that have, or areas of the country that have much larger groups of people, fan bases, media, that are then help them get that attention, that then help make the decisions to get them into the polls, get them that national attention. And right now, even though the American Athletic Conference is going to be taking a little bit of a step back with Houston, Cincinnati, UCF all moving up out of them to the Big 12, so the top 3 of their best teams moving out of the conference, and potentially SMU as well might be joining San Diego State in the Pac-12 if that deal does go through. But even though they're going to be taking a little bit of a step back, well, now you have the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt, one of the conferences that was for a long time considered one of the worst conferences in the country, has now started its rise towards being viewed as one of the strongest had a very, very nice non-conference play this season with some big Power 5 wins, notably, of course, knocking off since Texas A&M, which doesn't seem as big of a win now as it did then, but still, there's some big wins by the Sun Belt teams, and they have started that rise towards getting into the AP poll. The talk is becoming that the Sun Belt is now going to become that new role that the American Athletic Conference held for so long. They're going to become that new darling of the media, that new top G5 conference. It doesn't matter what teams are in these conferences, if it's not dealt with quickly, if the Mountain West does not take a stronger stand, which we'll talk about here with these three keys, the Mountain West is going to be taken over again by the East Coast. It might end up becoming the third conference overall and being considered for rankings and being considered for G5, for the bowl bids for that CFP expansion slot. They might end up being the third conference overall if they're not very careful because of this path that Craig Thompson has set them on. Again, Mountain West dropping in the national estimate. It's been a steady decline, and it's really plummeted recently. And a lot of the members are looking for the door, especially for the P5, if it's offered to them. And that might not be something that is able to be avoided. But if you still have the East Coast rise, if the Mountain West keeps getting shut out of the CFP expansion, if they are not being able to put forth teams with same records and being considered, you're probably going to see a lot more members potentially looking to jump ship and maybe even going and joining the American Athletic Conference, something that Craig Thompson was able to help kind of ride out that wave and prevent. But I think it's temporary for now. The Mountain West is in big trouble right now. It has been for a while, and it's only going to get worse. These are some top things that Gloria Nevarez is going to have to look at when she comes and takes over the top slot here as the Mountain West Commissioner. So what are some things just to set the right mindset here, the right mentality? These are some things that she needs to have when addressing the Mountain West. Moving up from the FCS to the FBS, West Coast Conference to the Mountain West. There's some different takes mentality-wise that she needs to have when addressing this conference. First and foremost, football and basketball are most important, with football being the most important. You know, obviously as a conference, you want to provide opportunities in all sports, but football and basketball, you cannot sacrifice those two in order to help out the other sports. If something has to give, it has to be something other than these two sports, and with football being the most important. Not only is it the main money maker, football and basketball both being the main money makers for most schools across the country, but especially in the Mountain West as well. Football, of course, taking the top there. It's also the way to national esteem. It's the way to establishing yourself as a top conference. Football and basketball always have been the most watched sports. That is how you're going to establish yourself. So football and basketball, you know, you look at it as Mountain West Commissioner, you've got to think of a lot of teams and a lot of different sports, but you cannot lose sight of the fact that football and basketball have to be the top number one priority here. Secondly, here, Mountain West is not an average G5 conference. She should not come into this conference thinking that this is just another run-of-the-mill G5 conference, because it's not. They are the top or among the top conferences in the group of five, and they should be compared favorably with a lot of P5 conferences. You know, especially 2021, there was a lot of ranking systems out there, a lot of news sites that were putting the Mountain West ahead of not just the American Athletic Conference, but even the Pac-12. You know, obviously the Mountain West is not going to stack up against the SEC. They're not going to stack up against the Big Ten. But when you start looking at the Pac-12, when you start looking at the ACC, and even with this new look Big 12, the Mountain West, team to team, bottom to top, does stack up pretty favorably. Of course, there's going to be some top teams in all three of those conferences that would probably eclipse what the Mountain West is able to offer. But when you look bottom to top across the board, the Mountain West stacks up favorably with all three of those conferences and should be considered the top group of five conference. And that's the mentality coming in that Nevarez should have when she's looking at the Mountain West. This is not another just average group of five conference. She needs to come in with the mindset that this is the best group of five conference and a conference that can compete with the Power Five, and it should be that should be first day coming into the door, the mindset she walks in with, and that should affect every other decision. Thirdly here, the FBS is different than the FCS. I mean, that goes without saying, but especially when you're talking about the group of five level, it's not just about, all right, let's go and be competitive and win our games and everything else will work out. There is so much bias. There is so much having to play to the media, to play to the pollsters, especially that the BCS is not a thing anymore, and all the rankers are biased human beings. There's so much politics that goes on at the group of 5 level, especially, but at the FBS level as a whole. It's not so plain and simple as the FCS, where if you win your conference, get a shot into or slot into the playoffs, and everything works out from there. It's not just wins and losses. It's about how you market and about how you play to the emotions and to the media appeal of your conference and to the nation as a whole. You're trying to play and win the hearts and minds and to convince people through straight up propaganda, as the American Athletic Conference has, that your conference is the best. Wins and losses across the board are not going to be enough to prove that. And then finally, East Coast bias and Power 5 bias are real and should be seriously considered and contended with, specifically for the Mountain West when you're approaching football, trying to get your teams into a point where they can compete. East Coast bias, as I've explained a little bit already, looking at teams that get to play on earlier time slots and also sitting in parts of the country that just have more people, you're going to have more awareness for those teams. Then, of course, you also have Power 5 bias, which looks at, okay, you've got 2 divisions of college football. This is part of the bias. It's not reality, but you've got 2 divisions of college football, and basically teams in the G5 cannot compete with the Power 5, and their wins should be evaluated at a much lower level than Power 5 wins across the board. Both, that is the bias. Again, that's not reality, but the G5 and the P5 and the East Coast bias are both major things that the American Athletic Conference has done a great job of working against, or actually East Coast works in their favor, but working with East Coast bias and working against the Power 5 bias to set themselves above the rest of the conferences, and it's something that Nevarez has to consider when she comes in here and takes over the Mountain West Commissioner slot. All right, top 3 priorities here. Top 3 priorities to get the Mountain West back on track towards being the top group of 5 conference and being considered as a team, as a conference that competes with the Power 5, just as the American Athletic Conference oftentimes gets that recognition. Number 1 here, you got to scout out some new members, because the Mountain West teams, there's a lot of teams there that might be getting plucked off here and there. San Diego State already talking about maybe going out the door. You'll be down to 11 potentially. Fresno State is not off the table as a team that could be taken at some point, potentially for the Pac-12. Boise State, obviously a team that should be in conversation for these realignments, has not been a big player in realignment, but something could change there. Maybe people could actually get some sense and realize that it's not about regional markets, it's about national markets. It's about what you bring to the table as a TV team that can be viewed across multiple digital platforms, the digital market sphere. And Boise State beats out every Mountain West team in that category. So Boise State could be a team that might be headed out the door if given the right opportunity. And even UNLV, even the bottom of the conference, is being talked about as potentially a team that could be expanded or moved into the Power 5 just because of how their regional impact there with Las Vegas right outside their doorstep. So scouting out new members is extremely important right now, because you're taking over a conference that it is not stable. A lot of things could change. If you drop down to 11 members, then that's going to be bad, of course, for the Mountain West. But even at 12, even if San Diego State stays in the conference and you're sitting at 12, you're still one of the smaller membership-wise conferences in the group of 5. And when you talk about the super conference conversation, the more numbers that you can have, the more beneficial it's going to be, because you're going to have more viewership opportunities and you're just going to be increasing your national footprint. And so the Mountain West here, sitting at 12 teams, is not extremely competitive. A big part that they have fallen so far off the wayside is because they haven't been marketed correctly under Craig Thompson. But another bit has been the fact that they have not reacted aggressively to the expansion conversation. They have reacted to try and keep their members in and failed at some times and succeeded at others, but they have not reacted aggressively to bringing in new membership and increasing and building the brand that is the Mountain West. So right now, 12 teams. It's not enough. If it goes down to 11, they're going to definitely need to bring up at least one more team to get back to 12. More could follow if there is not quick replacement. If you don't solidify the conference, other teams could be looking for the door. So The FBS, of course, is where you would like to pull teams. So maybe there should be some teams that get looked at there, potentially give them some offers to try and get them to come over. The Conference USA and MAC are probably the prime targets for this. American Athletic Conference and Sun Belt are probably too strong when it comes to what they are building as far as national attention goes, especially American Athletic Conference. Even though it's been weakened, I think they still have the national recognition that it would be hard to convince members to come play in the Mountain West. But Conference USA and MAC could be prime targets. From Conference USA, you could maybe pull in UTEP. Again, it's not a team that you look at and say, hey, this is going to increase our conference strength dramatically. But you're talking about ways to expand your market, push into the Texas market potentially, and just, again, building your numbers up overall. UTEP, a team that, hey, they beat Boise State. It was a completely different Boise State team at the time. The current Boise State team under Dirk Cutter would absolutely decimate them, but it was a different Boise. But regardless, they still managed to beat Boise State. They have played competitively this season. They have a good basketball program. So UTEP would be a team that you could potentially pull up. UTSA, now, that's a program that's on their way to the American Athletic Conference, but there's a lot of traveling there. I mean, that is a huge divide between the majority of the American Athletic Conference teams, especially now that Houston's gone, the majority of the American Athletic Conference teams, and where UTSA is. Potentially with the right deal, with the right enticement, with the right energy, potentially UTSA could maybe be pulled into coming and joining the Mountain West. If you brought UTEP and UTSA in together, it would make sense geographically because it now builds the conference south and north there with UTEP, UTSA, and then you've got New Mexico right there, and then you've got, of course, Wyoming, Colorado State, and you build yourself up. It would make sense. It'd make a lot of sense geographically, and it would build the Mountain West into the Texas market. That could be a good grab, and the right type of commissioner might be able to get that done. Now, the MAC, it's probably not the best place to pull teams from because, again, not necessarily high quality teams, and geographically it doesn't really make sense. But potentially you could pull Toledo and Western Michigan, bring them together as travel partners. That might make sense if you brought both of them together. Again, probably not your best bet. Your Conference USA with UTEP and UTSA are probably the best teams to go for. But hey, the American Athletic Conference, right now, geography doesn't really matter. Teams are pulling teams from everywhere. Who would have thought that the Big Ten would pull apart the Pac-12 to bring teams from California to come join the Big Ten? So already geography doesn't matter. It impacts a group of 5 teams a little bit more because they don't have the same money. Just pure and simple. They don't have the same money to work with as these Power 5 programs do. But the Group of 5, American Athletic Conference is reaching coast to coast. New Conference USA is well expanded out. So, you start looking at teams that you could pull in. Maybe the MAC might be some established programs here in Toledo and Western Michigan that you can pull in. But hey, if we're going to be crazy about it, if we're going to say, let's go grab the best that's out there who we could definitely probably convinced to come join us. Hey, let's get crazy with it. Go after Liberty. That is a conference, that is a team that is on the rise right now. They're in the 5th season in the FBS. They have been to 3 straight bowl games, winning every single one of them, and now they're bowl eligible again, so they'll be going to their 4th bowl game this season. They're an 8-2 team right now. They have 2 Power 5 wins underneath them, multiple Power 5 wins coming into this season as well at the FBS level. So this is a team that has the money. I'm not going to go into a whole Liberty promotion here. Everybody knows that I also, Liberty is another one of my teams, Boise State and Liberty, my 2 teams here. And so I have a lot of love for Liberty and what they're able to bring to the table. Not just football, basketball. They also have great other sports as well across the board, baseball, softball, Olympic sports. So, this would be a great grab for any conference. It doesn't really make sense geographically at all. But you start talking about a team that could afford it. Liberty's got a $2 billion endowment. They could definitely afford to send their teams to the Mountain West. They bring in a massive TV viewership nationally because of their massive impact, over 100,000 students online. So I'm not going to go into another big spiel here, specifically talking about Liberty. But if you're going to go crazy with it and talk about teams thinking outside the box, which again, that was not Craig Thompson's strong point. Old planted pot Craig Thompson put his roots down and didn't look back. If you take a new commissioner here who is aggressive, who is willing to do anything she can to expand this conference and to make this conference great and to bring bring them up in the national media and the national perspective, start thinking outside the box, Liberty would be a great add to bring into the conference here. And maybe there's some other teams that you could potentially look at that don't make sense, but if you gave them the right package, they might be willing to come in and would actually help bring the conference and expand their image. Now, having talked about FBS level, there are some teams here in the FCS that would make a ton of sense to bring into the conference, especially if some of these group of 5 teams that we talked about are not able to be brought into the discussion. Looking at the Big Sky Conference here, this is a great spot to pull some teams from. The FCS is kind of being raked over right now. I mean, you already had the Sun Belt bringing up teams. Now Conference USA is bringing up teams. Really being their top teams are already kind of being drawn out of the FCS. This is maybe a chance for the Mountain West to do the same thing. Come in here and grab Montana and Montana State. You know, both of those teams, top 25 teams, routinely throughout the years, top 25 teams in the FCS there. And also historic programs. I believe it's I think it's Montana State has had a program since like 1896. So, I mean, historic programs that Boise State played a bunch, and a lot of these other Mountain West teams have played in the past when they were FCS programs before making the jump and moving up. So these are 2 teams that would make you bring them in together. Montana, not necessarily, you know, a world beater as far as the state goes, as far as you're going to be bringing in massive populace, but definitely competitive teams that could bring in and help bring some competitive nature in both basketball and football for the Mountain West. Gardner-Webb, Eastern Washington. You know, Gardner-Webb is a program that is getting a lot of investment right now, and is definitely a program that's on the rise. I mean, they beat Utah State earlier this season. Eastern Washington with that horrible, atrocious red field. I mean, no, you can't be Boise State. Boise State's the only one that does the colored field game the right way. Every other conference does. Other teams have done it, do it okay. But Eastern Washington, I mean, that is the most disgusting field you've ever looked at, but it has brought them some national attention here, has helped build their program, and another team that plays well at the FCS level could definitely bring them up. Now, let's get crazy with it here. Let's get crazy with it. South Dakota State and North Dakota State. I mean, 2 teams there that you would think would never come up to the FBS level because they have a pretty good deal going right now where they are always competing there for national championships in the FCS. Why would they come up to the FBS level where they're not competing for as much? Well, a couple of reasons. First off, NIL. I mean, NIL is such a huge disruptor in college football that I think it would be enough to maybe break away some of these teams that are saying, well, if we stay at the FCS level, we're not going to have the same opportunity to give our athletes the national exposure that some of these even lower level FBS teams, but especially move up into an FBS conference that has a strong, has a strong history of being competitive. You bring them up into that level, especially if you have a new commissioner coming in and maybe getting them some new national spotlight and attention, media attention, because the NIL is going to start, I think, drawing a lot of these players away who might have considered going to the FCS to compete in their state or to compete. They might start looking, well, now I want to have a chance to go out and earn money right now in college. And you will have some opportunities in the FCS, but I think that really plays into the FBS as far as advantage goes. The second fact is the FCS is getting picked over. I mean, you're the best teams, or a lot of the better teams are getting moved up. I mean, you already had James Madison moving up to join the Sun Belt. So you've got a lot of teams that are getting pulled out of the FCS levels. The FCS just isn't becoming as competitive. The teams that are fun to watch, a lot of teams that bring in some maybe of that TV viewership, are being pulled out of the FCS. If you don't jump on the boat quickly, you might miss it altogether and miss a chance to move up to the FBS level and get that national exposure. Now, third reason here, again, they can play for championships. Why would they want to move up to the group of 5? Well, now the group of 5 can compete for national championships. Automatic bid for the college football playoff. That is huge. That is a massive marketing opportunity that you bring in North Dakota State and South Dakota State into your conference with the teams that are already in the Mountain West. And again, a new commissioner is maybe a little more aggressive as far as marketing and promoting them. Well, now you have a really good shot at having your conference champion competing for that national championship bid. Really, really strong spot at being able to put them in a place where they can go and compete in the college football playoffs. So now you're able to market that. So North Dakota State and South Dakota State have stayed strong. They haven't looked like they wanted to move out of the FCS, but the right commissioner might be able to get that done. That would be a huge snag for the Mountain West and bring a lot of stability and strength to the Mountain West as a whole. All right. We talked a lot about key number 1 here. We'll move on to key number 2, or priority number 2, is increase the exposure for football. And we talked about the East Coast bias, and a way to compete that is not to play so late. I mean, the Mountain West, nobody is watching games after 8 p.m. unless they're already a Mountain West fan. You'll have a couple of really committed football fans that might watch it, or someone's at a bar late at night and the game's on and they'll watch it. But nobody is saying, hey, well, I'm waiting for my game to come on, or whoa, my game just finished, but this game's coming on. All right, I'm gonna sit and watch it. Nobody's doing that for Mountain West teams because their games are so late. Let's compare the American Athletic Conference this last week. This is the week that Boise State beat Nevada, for reference. This last week, the American Athletic Conference, every single game was between 11 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. Every single game that they played. The Mountain West had one game at 2:30 p.m., but they had 4 games that started later than 6 p.m. and 3 games that started later than 9 p.m. Boise State versus Nevada and San Jose State versus San Diego State both kicked off at 9:30 p.m. That is insane. That is absolutely insane that they kicked off that late. And I will preface this, that was Central Time. Because again, when I wrote this video, I wasn't thinking, I usually try to speak in East Coast time or Mountain West time, but that was Central Time. Those games, East Coast, were kicking off at 10:30 p.m. Nobody's watching the game. Not a soul on the East Coast watched Boise State beat Nevada, and not a soul watched San Diego State beat San Jose State. Nobody. Absolutely nobody. It doesn't matter that you were on a national TV network. Nobody watched those games. A lot of people, even though they weren't the best games, except for Cincinnati, except for the UCF game, UCF versus Tulane, that was a good game. But a lot of people watched the American Athletic Conference games because they're on a national broadcast, and because they're on at a time that people watch football. Nobody's watching football after 10:30 p.m., especially on a Saturday where they got to get up the next day for church. So nobody's watching those games on the East Coast that late. That is a major, major priority that Navarez coming in here needs to move those Mountain West games earlier in the week so that people on the East Coast actually watch it, because a lot of times Mountain West teams will go out and they'll play a great game. They'll play a great non-conference game, or they'll play a great game in conference, and nobody cares because nobody saw it happen. And now that every pollster is a biased human being, you don't have a computer system that watched all the games statistically to put forth an even plateau. You've got biased human opinions, and I can guarantee you that a majority of these CFP committee members are not watching the Mountain West play, and it shows when they rank teams, Mountain West versus East Coast, because you'll have East Coast teams that play similar or worse schedules than the Mountain West, with the same or worse, in some cases, records as the Mountain West, and the East Coast teams get put up on the rankings because they're playing earlier when people watch football. Another big issue here, the Mountain West needs an ESPN deal. CBS Sports Network, FS1, and FS2, nobody's really watching that. If you can get a big game, there's the potential to end up on Fox or to end up on CBS, and that potential is there. But most of the Mountain West teams aren't going to ever play a game throughout the season on one of the big networks. As far as CBS Sports Network, FS1, and FS2, nobody's really watching it. Some providers don't even provide it. But if the Mountain West wants to have an opportunity to put its brand out there, they've got to be on ESPN. And that's something that Navarez has experience with, bringing an ESPN deal to the West Coast Conference there. She's had some experience with them. She's worked with them in the past. The Mountain West needs to get back on the ESPN deal, because that is the best way. I don't think they're the best broadcasting team overall. It's very, very kind of, it's broad market moves here. They're not putting in the best broadcast, but they're putting in a lot of broadcasts, and they're getting you to a lot more homes, a lot more accessible than CBS Sports and FS1 and FS2. It may mean more ESPN Plus games for smaller teams, but it will mean better primetime slots, better opportunities to be viewed nationally for the bigger Mountain West teams. Honestly, when we're talking about countering the East Coast bias effect, this key here, increasing the exposure for football, in putting those games earlier in the day and putting them on networks that people are actually going to watch, that right there could be a major switch for the Mountain West. being able to actually put their brand out there and become something that people talk about on the East Coast and are aware of, versus right now, nobody knows what's going on in the Mountain West. All right, last key, biggest key, I think, overall. We've talked about scouting out some new members and bringing some stability to this conference. We've talked about increasing exposure for football. But this key right here, I think, is the most important priority for Gloria Nevarez coming in here as a new Mountain West commissioner. Promote the members. Craig Thompson did nothing to promote the brands of the individual conference members, and did really nothing overall to promote the brand of Mountain West. He said, we're not going to get into all that silly propaganda like the American Athletic Conference is, calling themselves the P6 and claiming national championships and throwing national championship parades. We're not going to get into all that. We're going to be the high class. We're going to take the high road, and we're just going to say that we compete at the peak of competition, with beautiful venues, and we're a really, really great conference. You should look into us if you're ever up at 10:30 p.m. and decide to stumble into a bar where a football game is on. That is not the mentality. You do not compete in the modern era of college football. You do not match what the East Coast brings to the level of play in college football. You do not compete in the modern era of college football if you do not appeal to the emotions and to the propaganda side of college football. You have to understand that. You have to be able to, speak into reality, speak into existence what you want to see happen for your conference. If you want to be a Power 6 conference, if you want to be considered as one of the top conferences, you have to tell people that you are a Power 6 conference, and you have to convince them of that. And your play on the field is part of that. I mean, you can't say that you're P6 and then lose all your non-conference games like most of the Mountain West teams did this last season. But in the past, the Mountain West has gone and done great on the field, on the road, and nobody's cared. The Mountain West has got to market themselves better. They've got to have that P6 mentality. They've got to say, well, we're Power 6, and you can accept it or not. We don't care, because the truth is that we're part of this discussion. And that is how the Mountain West has got to market themselves here moving forward, because anything short of that is going to allow the Sun Belt and American Athletic Conference, which both have very aggressive leadership that understand this concept, is going to put the Mountain West behind both of those and leave them in the dirt. And eventually, you could see the Mountain West slipping even further, especially if they lose teams to other conferences across the board. They've got to build up the members for success. They have to promote the individual members. They have to give them the opportunities to be viewed nationally. Now, part of that goes back to increasing exposure, but part of that just goes back to having the right brand that you present, and Gloria Nevarez has experience with that. I mean, she solidified and brought unity to the brands across the West Coast Conference there, and promoted them at a more stable level where they were saying, all right, we now have a unified vision where we're moving forward. The Mountain West needs that. They need to have something that puts them at the same level, at the same table of discussion as what the American Athletic Conference and now the Sun Belt has been able to do, where they are promoting themselves as a Power 6 conference, as a conference that is the top conference in the group of 5, and not even just the group of 5, they're even above that. They're part of the Power 6. They cannot be scared of their members achieving high levels of success and moving up into the Power 5. That's kind of part of college football right now. But the American Athletic Conference, the way that they have reacted to that, to them, they're being picked over for the Power 5. They said, this is awesome. This means that people recognize that our conference produces the best teams. And when they start looking at expansion, they look at us because they want the best. And you know what that allows them to do? It allows them to go out and convince teams that geographically don't make sense, but are the best in the group of 5 to come and join their conference. The Mountain West cannot be scared of success for their individual members. I think that was a big part of it for Craig Thompson. Part of the reason that he didn't promote the Mountain West so aggressively is because he was scared that they might get picked over. And that allows you to be completely taken over by the rest of the group of 5. You cannot have that mentality. You have to have a mentality where you are attacking the future. You attempt to put your conference in the discussion as part of the Power 6. If it doesn't work out, if your members get promoted so highly, if they raise in the rankings, if they end up getting themselves in the playoffs, and they may end up bringing in all this money and attention and media to the conference and then get moved on to bigger and better things, oh well, they were able to bring in all this attention because you put them in the right spot. And now that you have your conference at a top level, you are now able to bring other teams in that allow you to maintain that level of success. That's what the Mountain West has got to do. This is the biggest priority, that they have to provide opportunities for the conference to stand out. Now, not necessarily exactly doing this, but Gloria Nevarez has experience in finding unique ways to get members and conference as a whole some unique exposure. For example, she took Pac-12 teams, all-star and regular season teams, to China and Australia. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying duplicate that and do that for the Mountain West, but I'm saying that we have someone coming in here who thinks outside the box, who is able to look at how do we bring a different level of exposure to this conference, promote this conference in a way that sets it apart from every other conference out there in the group of five and puts them in the discussion as being part of one of the top conferences in the country. How do we do that? She, while not necessarily facing this exact problem, has dealt with how do we expose our conference and bring it attention in a different way and provide our athletes an opportunity to shine in a way that no other conference is doing. She has done that in the past. So while I speak for all Mountain West fans that I know, I mean, I truly believe that I speak for all Mountain West fans here, or the vast majority of them, that we agree that you can't get worse than it is right now. Regardless of what Gloria Nevarez brings to the table, she's a little bit of an unknown factor, you cannot get worse than Craig Thompson. Any change right now is good change for this conference. But I'm actually excited about what Gloria Nevarez brings to the table. I hope that she lives up to this. It is not very big shoes to fill here. I know the media has been talking about how big shoes this is to fill because they really loved the no nonsense, absolute mediocrity that Craig Thompson brought to the table. But an outsider here who is hungry, who has succeeded at a high level, very, very quickly rising up the ranks from, working as just part of the school staff to moving up to working at a top level of Power 5 conference and now running her own conference at the FCS level, now at the FBS. I mean, this is a go-getter who charges hard. Can she come in here with a little bit of an outside perspective, maybe outside of the group think that has permeated and just absolutely sunk this conference? Can she come in and change that and actually bring this conference to the level of competition and national attention that it deserves, that its members go out every single week and compete for and prove that they should be in that conversation? Can she actually get them the national attention that they deserve? Let's hope. I'm excited for the future here. Like I said, anything will be better than what we've had. This is definitely a good step just because it's a new step, but I also think that there are some opportunities here that she might be the perfect candidate for to potentially go out and fulfill for the Mountain West. Thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know what the top priorities should be here for Gloria Nevarez here, the new commissioner for the Mountain West. Let me know what you think the top priorities here should be for the Mountain West moving forward. And if you think that the Mountain West is going to be able to achieve the goals that a lot of its members institutions have for it, do you think the future is bright here for the Mountain West? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. As always, like, subscribe, not just Boise State content, Mountain West content, and FBS content in general. So make sure you like, subscribe, and as always, go Big Blue!